Hi, I'm Susie Larson. Thanks for listening to this podcast from Susie Larson Live.
It's only just a matter of sing, so the back row is your glide. 'Cause walking just won't do dance. You don't have to know how to. Ever since we've got you left.
Welcome to Susie Larson Live. Always so honored to get to spend this time with you. In fact, I look forward to bringing you conversations every single day that hopefully inspire you in your faith walk, that deepen your understanding of God's Word, and that heightens your awareness of His very real presence in your life. Imagine if this were your story. Your mother served as an Army nurse during the Vietnam War. She wrote a best-selling memoir. And then you turn 17 and your mom passes away from an autoimmune disease connected with Agent Orange. Then you turn 21. You surprisingly inherit $250,000 from your mother's estranged family estate, something you never expected. And you manage to spend it all in the course of 2 years. And with aspirations of a career in comedy, Molly Stillman used humor to mask the pain and brokenness she felt. This is her story. She believed that if she looked joyful and put together on the outside, it would eventually be true on the inside. Instead, she spent the next few years feeling depressed, lonely, and alienated from those closest to her. Yet God always had a plan for her life. Today, we'll talk about how God redeemed and restored Molly's story. He redeems our stories. That's who He is. That's what He does. Molly Stillman joins me today to talk about her memoir, and we'll draw from her book, If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry, how death, debt, and comedy led to a life of faith, farming, and forgetting what I came into the room for. We'll get her on in just a moment. Quick announcement. If you're traveling this season, you can take us with you. Go to the App Store, look for Faith Radio Network, download it, and you can live stream the shows from anywhere, or you can catch the podcast after the fact. People are loving it. People are listening from all over the world because of that app. So if you've not checked it out, you got to do so. All right, let me tell you about my guest. We'll get her on the show. Molly Stillman is the host of Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder podcast. She's an author and a sought-after speaker. Her deep passion lies in inspiring women to know they were created on purpose, with a purpose, and for a purpose. Molly lives with her husband, John, her children, Lily and Amos, what great names, and various animals on a small farm in Durham, North Carolina. She loves Jesus a whole lot, drinks too much Diet Coke, and eats a lot of Chipotle burritos. Molly, welcome to the show.
Susie, it is an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, the tables are turned, my friend, because it was such a fun and a treat to be on your show, and it's an honor to have you with us today. And before we dig into your story, this is a question I ask every day on the show. It's the same question always, and it really doesn't have to relate at all to your book's content. It's just what's on your heart. What in your time with the Lord these days, what's He been impressing upon your heart?
Well, I love this question, and I did put a little thought into it before I came on the show. And I'll tell you, the first thing that actually came to mind was I just wrapped up. I do Bible study fellowship. I think I told you that. And we just wrapped up our study of the book of John. And in John chapter 21, right before Jesus ascends, He's having this conversation with Peter. You know, the conversation that I think a lot of us know, where He says, you know, Peter, do you love me? You know, feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Do you feed my lambs? This conversation. And something interesting just occurred to me in my study this time. Is the first time that he refers to him, he actually calls him Simon, the name that he was before he met Jesus. And you know, this repetitive nature of this asking of this question 3 times kind of even harkens back to, you know, prior to Peter's betrayal, when he says, you know, like, you're going to deny me 3 times. And so it's like this reminder to Peter that he had to be broken. But in order for him to be broken, in order for Jesus to restore him, which He's doing in that moment at the end, you know, He's restoring him to ministry and calling him to ministry and telling him, you know, the great things that He's going to do for Jesus. But he had to be broken before that he could be restored. And it was just one of those things that has been a really sweet reminder to me that Jesus restores what is broken. And oftentimes that's us. And we see that in Peter in that story. And it's just really stuck with me in the last couple of weeks.
Wow. Thank you for sharing so much. Well, give us a backstory look at your childhood. What was childhood like for you?
Well, I grew up in a home with two parents who were recovering alcoholic Irish Catholics.
Hmm.
And, they met later in life. They were not their first marriages. They met where all Irish Catholic recovering alcoholics meet, and that's in an AA meeting.
Wow.
And, my parents, I think in a lot of ways, they'd lived so much life prior to them meeting and falling in love. Their romance was very much a whirlwind. My dad proposed on their second date, and they got
Hmm.
married 6 weeks after their first date.
Hmm.
And so my childhood was really just filled with a whole lot of love, a lot of laughter, and also a lot of pain. Like you mentioned in your intro, my mom served during the Vietnam War. And, a lot comes with that PTSD and, just the divisiveness of her memoir, Home Before Morning, and how that really brought a lot of pain, and also healing. And then my mom's illness. When my mom got sick when I was 9 years old, she was diagnosed with an extremely rare autoimmune disease due to her exposure to Agent Orange, and battled that disease for a little over 8 years. And so it was a home that was filled with laughter and love, but also deep pain and suffering and grief. And so it was quite a roller coaster growing up, for sure.
What stuck out to me so much is how much life was in both of your parents. I mean, they just seemed hilariously funny, filled with passion, making the best of really, really hard moments. I was really impressed with both of them. And for her, in her day, I mean, if I remember right, it was groundbreaking. She was the first female author to write about a firsthand experience in Vietnam. And so there was so many who said, you're a voice to us. You're giving voice to what this was really like. But then others opposed it and, had an adversarial relationship with her. And she faced so much opposition. And your father was just fierce in her defense and loved her so much. And, I just think about, Molly, of people who grew up with way less trauma and crisis, but their parents coexisted and just rode parallel paths, never connected. But you really saw him stand up for her. You saw him read to her. You saw him snuggle with her and just cancel his plans for her. I mean, those are things that you don't see in everyday marriages. And those things really stood out to me.
Yeah, I really got a front row seat to watching my parents live out those wedding vows, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do them part. It's not something that I really have ever taken for granted. And it's something that I'm forever grateful for. And the thing is that, again, it's not like this was their first marriage. For my dad, it was his third. My mom, it was her second. And, but I think, I don't know if I believe in soulmates, but if I did, I would think that would have been my parents. And I know that that's not everybody's story. But it is one part of my story that I'm just so unbelievably grateful to God for, because in a lot of ways, it really gave me a picture of what I want my marriage to look like, and how I want to reflect my wedding vows, with my husband, to my children and to my friends. And I really feel like I went into marriage myself with a picture of what marriage can and should look like.
Yeah, another thing that stuck out to me is, here there, she's army crawling, literally, pun intended, through the valley of sickness. And yet they found moments to have belly laughter where they made fun of things. And, they kind of had their inside jokes. And I think maybe I overrelated to it because of my own struggle and the way my husband has fought for me. But it's like, you think that, everybody else has it better because they have their health. Health is such an incredible gift, but it is amazing the treasures God does give in those deep, dark places. And I'm sure it was so traumatic for you to be a child, but have to worry about your mom and care for your mom. Did you feel alone in that? Like when you were at school, did you understand that wasn't a typical childhood's life?
I did. And, it's something that I've thought a lot about, especially in adulthood and over the last few years, as I'm raising kids, and my daughter is 10, almost 11. So she's, the age that I was when my mom had been sick for a couple of years. And I think about like, what would, I see it differently. And in a lot of ways, I had to grow up very quickly because I'm learning how to administer medications. I had to learn how to drive at the age of 11 in case something happened and we were somewhere and, we didn't have cell phones. So it's, I couldn't like just pick up a phone and call 911. But if I needed to get my mom to the hospital, I needed to be able to drive her there. And everything about having a chronic illness and, it just changes everything. It just takes everything from you. And in a lot of ways, a lot of everyday normal things become so much bigger. You can't just go to a restaurant. You can't just go to a movie theater because back then, what if the restaurant had a smoking section? If my mom even encountered cigarette smoke, that would land her in ICU. If we went to a movie theater and she happened to be sitting behind somebody who was wearing heavy perfume, the chemicals in the perfume would actually get in her lungs and irritate them so much to the fact that she would not be able to breathe and she'd have to go to the hospital. So, like basic things that we took for granted. And so, yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I saw the normalcy of life disappear. But at the same time, while in my head, I was having to grow up so quickly and I was having to care for my mom in a lot of ways. At the same time, I was still very much a child and I was, naive and I was selfish and I was, all of those things. And so I think in some ways I didn't in my head at the time realize that. I thought I was kind of more grown up than I really was. Whereas now with the benefit of hindsight, I see that I was almost like straddling these two worlds of childhood and adulthood. And I never really fit into either. And so that was something I've really had to grapple with as an adult when I look back on how I made decisions or why I did one thing one way or another.
One of the things I wondered about, because you guys were in this 100-year-old house and her illness was triggered. She was feeling kind of crummy, little aches and pains. But when you tear the walls out of a 100-year-old house and you found some dead birds in there, but the first thing I thought of, Molly, was mold, because that can trigger an autoimmune respiratory illness. But they just didn't know a lot about it back then. I'm sure there were other things at play, but that's just the first thing I thought of because anyway, but that triggered this cascade of just horrific symptoms for her in this intense battle. And around that time, I think, and maybe it was even before that, but it sounds like around that time, her family, extended family, judged her, wondering if she's trying to get attention. And I hate to overrelate, Molly, but I can't help it. Hers was far worse than mine. But still, when people don't understand, they either draw near and serve or they step back and make assessments. And it's so painful that her family did that. We're going to break here, but when we come back, I want you to talk about the repercussions of that, of just the implications of being so devastatingly ill, being, hauled from hospital to hospital to find out why she can't breathe. And on top of that, to have family members judge you for her being sick. It's so devastating. So we're going to talk about that. Well, in a little while, we'll talk about Molly's unexpected inheritance from a side of the family that seemed to hate them. And what happened after that? There's lots to talk about here. Molly Stillman is my guest. She's funny. So she writes heart-wrenching story with some belly laughter moments. If I don't laugh, I'll cry. How death, debt, and comedy led to a life of faith, farming, and forgetting what I came into this room for. You can text the word book if you want in on the drawing, 877-933-2484. We'll be back in a minute. Following Jesus is not just something we do. It's who we are. We follow him because he's the Savior of the world. He lived, he died, he rose again, and blew the doors off of the devil's claim on us. That's why we can live free, and we can share with others the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Right now, it's our spring fundraising season, and we would love for you to join the Faith Radio family. Tell others about how God has changed your life. Be an ambassador for Christ as you share the good news. And then, if you feel so led, would you join the giving family now? You can do so by clicking on the link in the show notes or simply give safe and secure online at myfaithradio.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to Susie Larson Live. Molly Stillman is my guest today. Title of her book is If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry: How Death, Debt, and Comedy Led to a Life of Faith, Farming, and Forgetting What I Came into the Room For. Her mother served as an Army nurse during the Vietnam War. She wrote a best-selling memoir back then. She was one of the first women to write about such an experience. And it really garnered so much praise and so much criticism. Some were just so offended that she really wrote from the heart about what it was like for her. Others felt affirmed and noticed and seen because she had the courage to do so. When she got home years later, got sick from Agent Orange and had respiratory illness, deep, deep sickness for about 8 years. Molly was born years before she got sick. Molly lost her mom when Molly turned 17. And then when she was 21, Molly surprisingly inherited $250,000 from her mother's estranged family estate. And she didn't know what to do with it. She spent it all over the course of 2 years. And we'll talk about the lessons learned about that in just a little bit. But Molly, we're at that point of your story where your mom is sick and she so desperately wants to be connected with her side of the family, but they're not making it so easy. So talk about how those relationships broke down.
Yeah, it's when you're sick, the thing you want most in this world is the people you love to be around you. And unfortunately for our family, that wasn't the case. I think there was, in some cases, I think some of it stemmed from some brokenness that happened post-Vietnam. When my mom returned, the only one that ever really supported my mom's decision to enlist and to serve was her father, my grandfather, Rodney. And it was, I think in a lot of ways, he was kind of the glue that held the family together. And there was just a lot of brokenness after my mom returned. And in fairness, she was battling alcoholism. She was battling PTSD. She was battling addiction and a broken marriage. And, and the reality was, there wasn't even a word for PTSD at the time. And so this was not something that I think anyone really had the tools to deal with. And Vietnam being so wildly unpopular as it was, I think in some ways her family didn't know how to support her and she didn't know how to ask for support. But then, years later, she gets sober, she gets married again, and, I'm born, and then she gets sick. And I think there was issues bubbling beneath the surface that it kind of became like a powder keg, in some ways. And it just, the illness just brought everything to the surface. And once my grandfather had passed, who was, again, kind of the last thread holding it all together, everything crumbled. And my mom's family just no longer wanted to have anything to do with us. And there was a lot of, accusations and things hurled, like that she was just addicted to drugs and she wanted attention and she was faking the illness and all these kinds of things. And I was witness to all of it. And, when I was such a young kid, like I was so confused in a lot of ways. And it also just hurt because, not only were, they were my mom's family, but these are my aunts and my uncles and my cousins and, distant, second cousins and things like that. Like, it was a pretty tight knit family. And so it just felt like a lot of loss after loss after loss. And I'll tell you, Susie, like for a long time, I carried with me a lot of anger, hurt, and resentment towards them, if I'm being really transparent here. And it's something that the Lord, like after coming to faith, I've had to really have a lot of hard conversations with God. And he's done such a beautiful work in the last few years, last decade, to really help me work through forgiveness and what true forgiveness really looks like. And I tell you, it's actually really beautiful. And, some of my mom's family, I have, been able to reach out to and tell them that I forgive them. I've been able to have a couple conversations with them. I've only been able to restore one relationship so far. But in the end, forgiveness is there. And I don't carry with me that anger and resentment anymore. And And I'm really thankful for the restorative relationship that is there and present. And that's been really beautiful and something that has been really healing. But I'll tell you, like, and I share that because I know that this part of the story is not uncommon for people, that there's relationships that people, have in their past that are whether, broken, and there might be unforgiveness or hurt that they're harboring. And once you really make the conscious decision to take that anger to the Lord and to really seek forgiveness, what freedom there is on the other side. But it also doesn't happen overnight. I mean, I'm talking, this took me over a decade of really working through and wrestling with these things. But the love, and it's the kind of thing where if any of my mom's family reached out tomorrow and wanted to reconcile, I would have that conversation because I genuinely love them. But man, it was really painful, but I'm thankful for the lessons that I've learned about forgiveness and love in the end.
Boy, as a believer, God is going to bring us to that point that, I always say that maturity and healing both come in layers, and the Lord knows what next thing we're ready to deal with. But ultimately, if you're walking intimately with God, He will lead you to the point where you have to forgive your offenders. And I was just thinking about your mom lying in bed, receiving a card from a family member when she was sick, and her heart fluttering, thinking, oh, maybe they're checking on me to see how I'm doing. And it turns out to be stay away from us kind of a card while she's on her sick bed. And it reminded me of Job's friends. And, I think it's so grievous when you have people, even if there's a backstory of brokenness, but obviously they had their own brokenness because, we need to pursue a heart of redemptive perspective. And so that they could not see her in her pain to the point that they would press past their own bias to try to have a heart of compassion, but they added to her injury. It is so grievous to me. And there was a point in the story where at your mom's funeral, and your dad was because he's so protective of her, and some of those folks were there. He wanted to, say something to address that. And he said, no, I'm going to address the people that actually have loved her and have been there for her. And he had everybody stand up and give her a standing ovation for the way that she valiantly lived her life. And I thought, wow, that's really something. Wow.
Yeah, I've learned so much about forgiveness through my dad. And yeah, it's one of those moments that moment of the funeral is one that is so important. And it's been a long lesson too, because I think more often than not, we can often dwell on the relationships of, the days of yore, the relationships of the past that, maybe the people who once were. Actually had a conversation with somebody this morning, and she said she was talking about how she kind of spent a long time living her life almost trying to prove a point to somebody who was no longer even a part of her life. And, she's like, I had this friend in high school who had said this thing to me, kind of telling me that I wasn't going to ever amount to anything. And so I lived the next decade of my life. This is what this woman said. She said, I lived the next decade of my life almost trying to prove that person wrong. Meanwhile, that person hadn't thought about me in a decade.
Wow.
And I thought about that. Like, she's like, instead, I was living to prove myself to somebody who chose not to be in my life instead of living for the people who did choose to be in my life. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how my dad really approached this with especially at the funeral. And it's a lesson. My dad actually is about to turn 80. And it's a lesson he's taken well into, his more seasoned years of life. And it's something that I've learned is how do you make the conscious choice to invest and to show gratitude to the people in your life that choose to be there rather than dwelling on the people who haven't. And then how do I in turn choose to invest in the relationships that are right in front of me rather than dwelling on the ones that maybe are no longer there. Yeah.
That's such a good word. I mean, it reminds me of the younger part of your story when you were invited to an Awana group and you were, you needed that kind of thing when you've got a crisis at home. You're invited to Awana. It felt like, Girl Scouts and brownies, and you got your little vest and your little patches, and you had a good friend. And this was your kind of foray into Christianity until the day came where your friend pulled you aside and said, we can't be friends anymore. You're not Christian enough for me. Mm-hmm. What was that about? Do you think there was something that What was that about? Did you ever get more context for that?
Well, Susie, I've got a really interesting story to tell you. So I'll tell you the backstory first. So I share that story in the book of I had a best friend in elementary school. I changed her name, but we'll call her Lisa. And I mean, we did everything together. I mean, think about, your best friend in elementary school. I mean, the sleepovers, playing, Barbie Dream Phone and Mall Madness and all that stuff. We traveled together, and she came from a very, very strong Christian family. And and so one day in PE in fifth grade, she pulled me aside and she sat me down and she said, I can't be friends with you anymore. You're not Christian enough for me. And it's one of those moments that is forever etched in my brain. It's just one of those very formative childhood memories, because truly from that point on, we basically never spoke again. We're more acquaintances, throughout the rest of our school and middle school and high school. And it was so deeply hurtful and in a lot of ways formative in my early years of what I thought Christians were like. Am I not Christian enough? Did I not go to Awana enough? Did I not memorize enough Bible verses? Did I not, insert whatever it is here? And so I really wrestled with if that's what church is like, if that's what Christians are like, then I don't want anything to do with that. And it was really, really painful. And I think, in a lot of ways, it's not like I never look back and thought Lisa was told by her parents that she couldn't be friends with me. I mean, I don't really know what it stemmed from, but here's the later part of the story. So my book has been out for a couple of months now. And obviously I did, change names and stuff. Well, let me just say that about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago, I get a Facebook message, Susie. And that Facebook message pops up and it is from Lisa. And I have not spoken to her in probably 30 years, maybe 25. Wow. And it pops up and I immediately have that sinking feeling in my chest. And it's not like I say anything, I'm not being disparaging. I'm just kind of sharing the honest story. And again, I changed her name, but I open up the message just kind of terrified. And it says, Molly, I want to let you know I picked up a copy of your book. And of course, I'm immediately like, oh no. And she says, I loved it. I laughed. I cried. It was, a lot of memories, and you're a great storyteller. And then she says, but then I was horrified to realize that I was Lisa. And she said, and to truth be told, she said, I don't have an exact memory of that moment, which I didn't expect her to, it wouldn't have been as formative for her as it was for me. And she said, but I wanted to apologize and wanted to ask for your forgiveness. Wow. And she said, God's really, it's amazing to see the work God's done in your life. And she said, and goodness knows, I had mean girl tendencies, and God has done a lot of work in me. And Lord knows I'm not Christian enough. None of us are. That's the point. That's the point of Jesus. And anyway, Susie, I ended up replying. We had, about an hour conversation back and forth where we just were catching up, and I was learning about her family and her kids. And it was, I think in a lot of ways, it's not like I ever expected or even needed or wanted an apology for something that happened in fifth grade. But I think what it really showed me was just the beauty of it is never too late.
Come on.
It's never too late to reconcile. It's never too late to ask for forgiveness. It's never too late to apologize for something. That was not something I had ever expected when I wrote this book and even shared that little bit of a story. I never thought in a million years she would even have picked it up and read it. But when I learned that, when she reached out, I tell you, it has been something, like a real gift from God that I was not expecting at all.
Wow. So as we go to break, friends, I'm just going to pray for every single one of us, because we all have those people in our past who, and it's such a good point, they might not remember it. And just like your friend, we might still be soaring from it, still thinking about it, still may carry weight, and they're not thinking about us at all. So I just pray God not only would deliver us, get us in a posture of, heart forgiveness where we keep the light on, but then that the Lord would bring to mind those who need to remember, so that the enemy could be taken out of the loop, that no more triangulating, because he works in ways where he keeps one person blinded and he keeps another person injured. And let's just pray in the name of Jesus that that God would not only heal your heart, help you forgive, but bring remembrance to their heart so reconciliation can happen and the enemy can be taken out of the equation. When we come back, we're going to talk about that day, that unsuspecting day on Molly's birthday when she was in college. She received a certified letter in the mail. She had no idea what it was about, but her life was about to change. Molly Stillman is my guest. We'll be back in a minute. Thanks so much for tuning into Susie Larson Live, talking to Molly Stillman. Her book is titled If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry: How Death, Debt, and Comedy Led to a Life of Faith, Farming, and Forgetting What I Came Into the Room For. It's a heart-wrenching memoir, so many twists and turns. You can text the word book if you want in on the drawing, 877-933-2484. Molly's mom served as an Army nurse during the Vietnam War. As just really groundbreaking, she wrote a best-selling memoir as the first woman to write about firsthand experience in Vietnam. And it was this bestseller, which invoked all kinds of praise from one camp and criticism from another. Her mom also contracted later in her, I think, her 30s, debilitating autoimmune disease from Agent Orange, which she was exposed to in Vietnam. And Molly, as a young girl growing up, loved her mom so much. Molly's dad loved her mom so much, but her mom struggled so much with illness that was their life, was centered around severe chronic illness. And her mom died when Molly was young. So then Molly's also estranged from her mom's side of the family because her mom's side of the family judged her mom and summed her up and decided that she was doing all this to get attention because in her early years she battled with PTSD and addiction coming off of Vietnam. So you can imagine how surprised Molly was one day when she was at college. It was her birthday, and she gets notification that there is a certified letter in the mail. Molly, I'll have you pick it up from there.
Yes. So I get this notice to go pick up a certified letter in the campus mail room. And this was not something that it was, anything I'd ever received before. And so I go down there and I sign for it and I pick it up. I take it over to a couch nearby and open up that padded, cardboard mailer, and inside was a stack of papers. And on top of the stack was a check for $245,785.74. And so, yes, if you're doing the math, it's just shy of $250,000. And that was also after taxes. So that was just basically cold hard cash in a paper check. Wow. And it was my actual 21st birthday. And so that was quite the birthday gift. And I was obviously had a lot of questions, as probably people listening do. And to make a long story short, a trust had been set up by my mom's parents, more specifically her father. And I guess it had been written in such a way that it was protected, and we were never written out of a will, even though that was not something that was, for sure ever communicated with me. And I had learned that my grandmother had died 2 years prior. I, obviously had not been notified of that. And so I learned that she had died, and essentially when she died, the trust then went into effect, and some properties they owned in Georgetown in DC would be sold off. And they then the proceeds would be divvied up 5 ways, one for each of my mom's for each of my grandparents' kids. But since my mom had died, her share went to me. And so, I obviously a lot of shock set in and kind of logistical questions. Like, I had no idea what to do with this check. And so I took it down to the bank, and the entirety of the financial advice I received was, you should put some in CDs and, the rest, pay off your college tuition and your room and board and all that. And that was pretty much it. And that was like, there's no, nothing about a 401k or IRAs or, nothing, no financial advice whatsoever. And, the reality was, here I was, I'm a grieving 21-year-old college senior who's spent most of her life, with not a lot of money. And suddenly I have a lot of money. And so I did what probably every other 21-year-old in a similar situation would do. And I proceeded to pretty much blow it all. I like to give myself some credit because I am also very hard on myself. And I gave some of it to my dad. I gave some of it to my sister. And then I did start a scholarship at my university in my mom's name, which is it's fully endowed. It's still in effect today. In fact, I actually got to meet the recipient of the scholarship this year, which was really cool. And but other than that, from there, I just went and bought a brand new $40,000 car. I flew myself first class to Rome for spring break. I just did a lot of very financially irresponsible things because it was this quick fix. It was this quick adrenaline hit, this dopamine hit. And it became addictive, and it felt like a Band-Aid on top of a really deep wound. And so less than 2 years later, I found myself not only having blown every last dime, but I was over $36,000 in consumer credit card debt. And so I had hit financial rock bottom, and I was spiraling out of control.
What happened then?
So when I hit the financial rock bottom piece, I was a year out of college. I was teaching high school. I was living in Richmond, Virginia, and I had realized that I was in more debt than I even made in a year, like my year teaching salary. And I couldn't make the minimum payments. I realized that I was in very deep. And so I had an actual panic attack on the floor of my room, and I considered taking my own life. And at that point, I kind of was clinging on to any last sense of hope that I could muster. And so I picked up the phone in a last ditch effort, and I called my bank. I had overdrafted my account again. And so I think I in a lot of ways, I felt like, okay, step one is I've got to figure out how to get these overdraft fees forgiven. And so I get on with the bank teller, and I remember she very quickly was like, I think your issues are a whole lot deeper than some overdraft fees. And so she, with compassion in her voice, she really spent the next few hours on the phone with me, trying to get to the bottom of my financial problems. She then connected me with a consumer credit card counseling agency, nonprofit counseling agency. And then that woman gets on the phone with me and spends another couple of hours with me, helping me develop a plan to get out of debt. And,
wow.
And what was really interesting, and these are two women that, I will never have the opportunity to thank. And they're not women that I, even know how to look them up, but they saved my life that day. Because instead of, making me feel more guilty than I already did, and there was no condemnation in their voice, but rather they heard the desperation and the fear in my voice. And there was compassion. There was compassion. And in fact, and neither, it's not like, BB&T at the time it's not like a Christian organization, and this credit card counseling agency, it's not like they were a Christian organization. But before we get off the phone, after being on the phone for over 5 hours, the woman at the credit card counseling agency, she said, "Can I pray for you?"
Wow.
And I didn't know the Lord, but at the time I said yes. And she did. And she prayed over me, this complete stranger. And, I learned a lot from her of just you never know. These two women, it's not like they worked for customer service for financial organizations. So it's not like they probably had a whole lot of great interactions with people on the phone. And yet they were, I really believe, angels in a lot of ways, just sent. And they just, it taught me a lot about how I interact with people. If I'm talking to somebody on the phone, or if I come across a waiter or waitress in a restaurant, or even a cashier at a gas station or at a grocery store, I never know what that person is facing. I don't know what battle they're going through. I don't know what pain they are carrying. And so sometimes compassion in our voice, love in our voice, and even sometimes the awkward moment of just asking somebody if you can pray for them, what that might do for somebody. And that day, those women, that not only I really believe kept me from making a really irreversible decision, but they also taught me about planting seeds of faith that, I may never see come to fruit.
Wow. And so in due time, you paid your way out of debt. I mean, I see God's grace and his hand on you even before you knew his hand was on you, that he was leading you to a place of freedom. How long did it take for you to feel like you got back on your feet financially?
Yeah. Well, so this was, this fateful day was in June of 2008, where I hit financial rock bottom, but I never hit emotional, spiritual, and mental rock bottom until September or the summer really of 2010. So It was a little over 2 years later where I was continuing to, yes, I was working to get out of debt, but I was isolating myself. I wasn't actually working to get healed and to actually deal with what was going on underneath. And so God, through that time I continued to strip that all away from me.
So on the other side of the break, I want to talk about how that happened, how God met you, what rock bottom looked like for you, how God was there to meet you. And friends, it's so interesting is Molly ended up marrying a financial advisor. So God, is preparing you in more ways than one for your future, right? Isn't he a financial advisor?
He is.
Yes. What a great part of the story. Yeah, no kidding. All right. When we come back, we'll talk about just what was going on and how you hit rock bottom, how God met you there, and what you know about God now. And if just looking back, not with regret, but just wisdom, what would you tell your younger self? We'll talk about those few things with the few minutes we have left. Molly Stillman's my guest. Her book is If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry. We'll be back in a minute. There's a truth that daily takes my breath away, and it's this. God wants an intimate relationship with us. He wants to hear from me. He wants to hear from you, and he moves when we pray. We make prayer a high priority at Faith Radio. We pray about everything. As Scripture says, we love to pray for people. We love to pray for you. If you've got burdens you're carrying, we don't want you to carry those alone. Share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio team by texting or calling 877-933-2484. Or you can share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio staff and listeners at myfaithradio.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to Susie Larson Live. Molly Stillman's my guest today. Title of her book is If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry, How Death, Debt, and Comedy Led to a Life of Faith, Farming, and Forgetting What I Came into this room for. You can text the word book if you want in on the drawing, 877-933-2484. Molly has a backstory of just incredible love, but incredible trauma, too. Just her mom getting so sick from Agent Orange from her earlier years in Vietnam and losing her mom at a young age and being estranged from her family. And then in college on her birthday, she receives a letter from a legal office saying that she'd inherited $250,000 from her estranged family. And then she blew it because she did some good things with it too, but she spent it, and as a lot of young college people would, finding herself at rock bottom financially and working her way out of that. But before the break, Molly, you were saying you still hadn't hit your heart rock bottom yet. And this is the thing, is God in his grace, he's always with us, but he knows the pace we need to move when we're finally ready to start healing. And I'd love to just know what that looked like for you. So you're trying to pull yourself together financially, but you still got some soul wounds. What were those wounds, and how did it all kind of come crashing down for you?
Yeah, I really had spent so long just striving and trying to, I had the mindset of, I got myself into this mess, so I have to get myself out of it. And it was a lot of self-focus. It was, you know, I was kind of just chasing after the things that the world told me would bring me healing and peace. And that was, you know, success and money and fame and all of those things that in a lot of ways, even relationships, you know, in a lot of ways, I idolized my parents' marriage. And so there was just this constant striving and feeling like I can do this all on my own. I don't need God. I'm mad at God. I'm angry at God. God is distant. He doesn't exist. I mean, I was battling all of those things. And what happened was God just continued to, in a lot of ways, and, you know, I have the benefit of hindsight now, but he was pruning away and stripping away all of the things in my life that I was clinging to and holding on to. And, you know, I hit that financial rock bottom. But then, you know, eventually I moved to North Carolina. I was in a relationship with someone who was not good for me. That relationship ended. And so then all of a sudden, you know, that's stripped away. I'm working 4 jobs trying to make ends meet and get out of debt. I'm living alone. You know, I was just running myself ragged, and I had gotten to the point where I was exhausted spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally. And yet I'd completely isolated myself. So, you know, on the outside, the average person would probably have been like, oh, Molly looks great. You know, her life is great. But on the inside, I'd put this big cover up, and on the inside, I was crumbling. And so in the summer of 2010, I had really, really hit this rock bottom where I was so broken. I was so broken. And I got to the point where once again, I was faced with 2 decisions. And those decisions were either one, make an irreversible decision to take my life, or to give God a shot. And I think in a lot of ways, I'd kind of gotten to this place where I was like, well, I'd tried everything else that was within my own control, within my own, you know, sphere of control. And that was just an illusion. And so what God really showed me was that I had to get to a point where I had to realize my need for him, that I wasn't actually created to carry the weight of the world on my own shoulders. And so, in a, you know, what I now know to be a move of the Holy Spirit, he just nudged me in the direction of asking the guy I was kind of seeing, who, spoiler alert, is my husband. And I, you know, to ask him if I could go to church with him. And he, of course, said yes. And so on September 26th, 2010, I walked into a church for the first time, and I was terrified, Susie, terrified. I mean, I just thought, like, this is a huge mistake. These people aren't going to want to get to know me. Like, I'm not going to be welcome here. I'm too broken. I'm too this, I'm too that. And I heard the gospel for the very first time, where I heard that there was a God in heaven who loved me, who created me on purpose, with a purpose and for a purpose, that there was no part of my story that was too broken to be redeemed, that this God sent his son Jesus to die on a cross for me, to live this, you know, perfect sinless life, to be raised 3 days later, and to defeat death and to forgive me of my sins, and that there was hope to be found in him. And it's not like I had this, you know, I don't describe it as like I raised my hand and fell to the floor, but it wasn't anything like that. It was more of like I walked out of that church that day with hope. And when you give hope to a hopeless person, like, that's a really, really powerful gift. And so I went back to church the next Sunday, and the next Sunday after that, and the next Sunday after that. And I started tithing, which, you know, obviously was a big part of my story. It's just, you know, taking the grip off of my wallet and my financial situation,
So
and really stepping out in faith in that area. And it just began this process of slowly but surely releasing every single part of my life to him. And I'm telling you, like, it's not like I, you know, gave my life to Christ and everything since then has been great and easy. That's not the case at all. But what I've learned is just that on the other side of surrender, when you surrender it all to Jesus and you find your identity and your hope and your joy and your peace in him and him alone, like, the life I live now, which is beautiful, and I am so grateful. I wake up every day so grateful. But if all of this were to be taken away tomorrow, if it were all go away tomorrow, which Lord willing, I hope does not happen, but if it did, like, I would still have the joy and the peace that is promised in Christ, and and I can hold on to that.
Thank you for this time today. Our time is up, but thank you for sharing your story. And friends, if you want to read a good memoir, you can text the word book to 877-933-2484. Molly, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor.
Hope is a powerful gift, friend. Maybe you can give someone some hope today. And none of us are Christian enough, so let's walk in love. We'll meet you back here next time. Thanks for listening to this conversation from Susie Larson Live. These podcasts are available because of listener support. You can become a supporter now at myfaithradio.com. And thanks for sharing this audio link to spread the good news of the gospel and to grow the impact of the show. Also, if you would, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast today at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. And never miss a show.
On the latest episode of the Wow God Stories podcast, we go to Africa.
I was raised in Sierra Leone, in a community that truly lived the phrase, "It takes a village."
Until one day, the world outside Anita's village broke in.
I didn't grow up in a war zone, but I watched one unfold in the country I love.
God brought hope to her story and many others through radical provision.
God began to direct us towards Uganda, Africa.
I was born and grew up in the countryside of Ethiopia.
Nanjan I met in Kigali, Rwanda.
Discover how God showed up in the middle of war, loss, and impossible odds in Africa. Stories that'll make you say,
"Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God."
Wow, God Stories. Wherever you get your podcasts.